In this video, Samuel Roberts, author of Gypsies, Their Origin, Continuance, and Destination, as clearly told in the prophecies of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezequiel, will give us a glimpse of his interactions with the Gypsy family. Hello, I am Daisy, your hostess. If you just found me at this video, I'd invite you to visit my book playlist to access the previous chapters of this book. And to my returning community, welcome back. All I can say is thank you. You journeying with me through this read has given me the push to get this final chapter done. Without you here with me, who knows, this book would still be gathering dust. And were it not for that spirit guide that whispered in my ear, "Get on with it, girl, these words need to be brought back from the past." Had it not been for those urgings, I would not have known the depth of the trials of the Romanis, the Gypsies. I always pictured them to be a carefree people, full of human dignity, unbeholden to man, yet supremely trusting that something greater watches over them, providing them with the needs of the day. I cannot begin to describe the sadness that touched my heart when I researched this topic and discovered the plight and discrimination of the Romanis. 200 years later still remains a stain on the human race. Oh, Roma, where do you come from? With tents happy on the road. And now we go into the final chapter of this book. Supplement. First Book of Corinthians, chapter 16, verse 11. Let no man therefore despise him, but conduct him forth in peace, that he may come unto me, for I look for him with the brethren. End of quote. In order truly to appreciate the marvelousness of the circumstances under which the Gypsies are represented to have been when the first accounts of them, of which we know, were written, it will be necessary to cast our eyes over the history of nations from the deluge for the purpose of seeing if an expelled people have ever in any other instance been so found. It was just before the invention of printing, for example from 1400 to 1440, that accounts were written which have reached us of their being then in almost every country of Europe and many parts of Asia. In general, they were not wandering in hordes from country to country, but stationary in almost every one of them. Not large colonies of them in some one place, but dispersed in each nation in clans or families, seldom more than from 10 to 30 together. Within that period, there are accounts of their being in France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, England, Holland, Germany, Poland, Hungary, Switzerland, Bohemia, Turkey, Livonia, Lithuania, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Transylvania, Wallachia, Moldavia, and many other countries, in all dispersed in the same manner at one and the same time. All the accounts agree in stating them as being strangers, coming from no one knew whither or by what means. Yet in all instances it would appear that they could speak the language of the country in which they were found, not only making themselves understood, but professing to tell fortunes. From all the accounts it appears, I think, that on the whole they were then as numerous as they are now. In Spain, they have been calculated to exceed 40,000. In Great Britain, 30,000. In Hungary, 50,000. In Moldavia, Wallachia, the Sclavonian mountains, and very many other countries, quite as numerous. Now then, how are we to account for such multitude of strangers being so found in almost every country of the then known world? Whenever the people of any country, from any cause, leave that country in great numbers together, they will, like all other great bodies, cease to move as soon as the impetus which acts upon them ceases to operate. If that impetus be oppressive tyranny, the security of the nearest mountain heights and recesses, or the first place beyond the boundary of the tyrant's power, will be sought and confided in. If the impetus arise from famine, the nearest countries that afford them subsistence will stop their progress. If the impetus be the effects of ambition, a desire of farther possessions, or the gratification of revenge, the objects being obtained, the efforts will cease. In the first instance, the emigrating people will, in all probability, carry with them and retain their ancient habits, laws, and customs, modified only so far as varying circumstances may require. In the second, the people wandering in the search of subsistence must disperse themselves for that purpose, conforming to the habits, laws, and customs of those among whom they may succeed in obtaining it, and eventually becoming incorporated and amalgamated with them. In the third instance, the effects must depend upon circumstances. They may compel the conquered people to conform to their laws and customs. They may adopt, in a great measure, those of the conquered country and people, or, as is most likely to be the case, an admixture of both will be adopted. At all events, in the end, all distinction is almost certain to be lost. Instances of all these cases may be found in abundance in the history of the world, but I am not aware of any one which, left to the natural course of events, may not be included in one or other of them. Of all the extirpated nations of antiquity, I do not know of one, not especially decreed by prophecy to preservation, the people of which have remained a distinct race, among the inhabitants of many other countries in the which they have been dispersed. In fact, there are only two such instances known in the world, the Jews and the Gypsies. As to the Jews, scarcely anyone now doubts that they are to this time preserved by the peculiar appointment, as declared by the prophets, of divine providence. Let us see, then, if it be possible to conceive that the other people, the Gypsies, could, but by the especial appointment of God, have been brought into such a situation as they were first found in, or have been preserved in it, in the manner that they have been. It is now more than 400 years that the Gypsies have been known, from authentic accounts, to have been inhabiting almost every country in Europe. In all, they were evidently the same people. In all, they were considered as being strangers from some very distant country. None of the accounts attempt to assign either the cause of their coming, the way in which they first came, or the period when they or their forefathers left their native land. These accounts of them became more numerous soon after the art of printing became known and practiced. From all of them it would appear that these strangers were then able to converse with the natives of the several countries in which they then resided. They therefore could not be just arrived in them. Though the Gypsies universally asserted that they were from Egypt, it does not appear that any of them could give any account of that country, or of the cause, the time, or the manner of their leaving it. All these circumstances tend to prove that they were the descendants of those who had left it ages before. From almost every country they are described as being fortune-tellers, a circumstance in itself exceedingly remarkable as applying to a people so numerous and so widely dispersed. It certainly evinces a great degree of sagacity and a long knowledge of the people and their language with whom they sojourned. They are said to have had their ears bored and ornamented with rings, many of them having cups and other articles of silver in their possession. In various instances, the hordes or families were under leaders who appeared on horseback, styled dukes, counts, and lords of Lesser Egypt. In every country, they appear from the first as living in separate hordes, tribes, or families dispersed generally in the unoccupied parts. In no country, in no instance, are they described as soliciting employment, or as seeking to obtain a livelihood, either as domestic servants, as cultivators of the soil, in the navy, in the army, as mechanics, or in short, in any capacity which distressed strangers would certainly both willingly and gladly have done. They appeared, on the contrary, as little independent clans, denizens of the open wilds, seemingly molesting no one, and anxious only to remain themselves unmolested. Hence, probably, it was that they obtained so little notice. When they came in contact with the inhabitants of the countries in which they resided, it was most likely in the pursuit of their itinerant habits of periodically removing from one part of the country to another, this practice being general with them all. Now let any man of common sense imagine 800,000 or 1,000,000 people of any nation expelled by any cause from their native country. Can he entertain a doubt but that such a poor, distressed multitude would disperse in all directions, and that all those who did not perish in the attempt would endeavor to obtain settlements wherever, howsoever, and as soon as ever they could? He might imagine, perhaps, though certainly very improbably, that a very few of them might, by some means or other, find their way through unknown lands, stormy seas, and over almost impassable mountains, from Hindustan or Egypt to England, France, or Spain. But what then? Why then they would most certainly be ready to embrace any opportunity of obtaining a livelihood among the people of the land in which they had arrived. But this can only be an imaginary case. No one can believe that, humanly speaking, such an instance even to 20 such people could really have occurred. But what is the incontrovertible fact as relates to the Gypsies? Why, that not only 20 of such people were actually found to have arrived in both France and Spain, but others also at the same time in 20 other countries in the same quarter of the globe. Nay, not only 20 of such arrived in each of those countries, but perhaps from 100 to 500 such hordes or clans of them in every one of these countries. The foregoing circumstances are, indeed, wonderful, but they are only the beginning of the wonders attaching to the astonishing event. These people were not only of habits differing from those of the people among whom they were found, but also, in many respects, from those of all the people that then were known, or ever had been known to exist on the face of the earth. Singular, too, as these habits were, they were found to be universally the same throughout the almost innumerable hordes of them then scattered among all the nations of the uncircumcised, as if they had dropped in such hordes from the heavens above, no one seeming to know, not even themselves, how or even when they came there. More wonderful still, though the innumerable scattered hordes of these singular and unprivileged strangers have now been known to have existed, in all these countries during 400 years, not one single horde has ever either adopted the habits and customs of its fostering country, nor even forsaken in any important point the habits and the customs of their first known forefathers. The whole people in all countries, without having had any communication together during the whole of the 4 centuries, have all remained in this singular state, unchanged in any respect. From the first of their being known to the present time, these strangers have been admitted to be the most sagacious people ever known as occupying a station so low in society as the one which they have all invariably retained throughout. It cannot then have been for want of capacity that they have not adopted the more civilized and respectable manners of those about them. There have been, and there still are, nations or people residing constantly in tents and removing frequently from place to place. But these are continuing the habits of their forefathers from age to age, in countries and other circumstances favorable to such a practice, and where the whole community follow the same. They have possessions of flocks and herds, camels, and riches of various kinds. They live not strangers among those that despise them, and whose superior enjoyments and attainments are continually tempting them to forsake their own simple and abstemious habits. The Gypsies, on the contrary, have universally adopted and continue to persevere in a mode of living totally unfitted for many of the countries and climes in which they exist. A mode which it has never been imagined, come from where they may, to have been that of their forefathers. A mode too totally before unknown in practice in all the countries in which they reside. though they see all around them toiling and striving in every way to acquire and lay up riches, they never, in any instance, seem actuated by the same desire to attain the same object. The obtaining from day to day their daily bread seems to be about the utmost that of any of them to aspire. Otherwise, in the course of 400 years, some one out of 800,000, during that period 10 millions, of a sagacious people dispersed throughout Europe would have acquired at least somewhat of lands and houses to have left to their children. But no one such instance, I believe, is on record. They have never been known to gather into barns, and yet some way or other their heavenly Father constantly feedeth them. It seems as if he had decreed them this and denied them more. While all other people may be described by what they possess, the Gypsies may be most strikingly designated and distinguished from all other people by here stating that they do not possess. They have no religion, i.e., no religion peculiar or common to them as people. They have no places of worship, they have no priests or professed teachers, no mode of worship. They have no idols, no images or outward symbols, no superstitious observances, no places of sepulchre. They have no country. In all places where they reside, they are aliens. They have no pedigrees, no ancestors of whose exploits they are proud, no love of fame, no desire to live in the remembrance of those who may descend from and succeed them. They have neither manuscript nor printed books in their language. With scarcely an exception, they can neither write nor read. There are no delineators, they have no oral tales or poems. They are neither dancers, singers, nor whistlers. They possess no arms of any kind, either offensive or defensive. They are no robbers nor midnight plunderers. If any instances have occurred, they have been so rare as only to form a striking exception. And what is very remarkable, situated as they are very rarely poachers, though they must frequently be greatly tempted to become such. To whom does all the foregoing combinations of extraordinary negative qualities pertain? If they had been possessed by some little horde of strangers, residing for a few months or years in any neighborhood, such would have been thought a very extraordinary people. But in this instance, they appertain invariably to perhaps more than 10,000 such hordes, dispersed throughout the whole of Europe and a great part of Asia, having in general no communication with each other, and to no one else in the whole world. Nor is all this a temporary coincidence only. On the contrary, their peculiarities appear to have attached to them all from the very first accounts of that singular people. All the aforementioned wonderful peculiarities mark the Gypsies for a people so dispersed, so disposed, and so preserved by an omnipotent being, either for past transgressions, for future designs, or for both. They appear to me like a people thus dispersed and long preserved throughout almost the whole civilized world, to attract its attention in order to display to it hereafter some signal instance of almighty power. They seem to me thus kept apart and totally unconnected with the people among whom they reside, to be ready at a moment's call. They have no possession, no attachments, no connections, no patriotism to detain them. They have no political, no religious, no long-established prejudices to overcome. They have no luxurious habits, no superstitious observances, no forms or ceremonies to impede them on their way. On the contrary, they are bold, a hardy, a sagacious, and persevering race. Accustomed to constant traveling and to the greatest privations, they would neither shrink from danger nor faint under difficulties. At an hour's notice, every one of the 800,000, supposing that to be the number of them, would be ready to commence their march. For the young, the aged, and infirm, they are always provided with conveyances. Starting from such numerous and distant stations, their progress, till they began to concentrate, would scarcely be found to be an inconvenience. Looking then at this astonishing people, only as we know them to exist at this time, and as we know that they have existed for 400 years. Setting prophecy apart, we cannot, I think, but come to the conclusion that such an anomaly in the history of the human race does not exist, nor has so long existed, but for some purpose out of the usual course of divine providence. God never acts in vain, nor even creates an instrument that hath not a work to perform. It cannot then be but that this extraordinary people are reserved in the manner and the state that they are for a work as extraordinary as they themselves are. What that work is to be was, I think, clearly foretold more than 2,000 years ago by the prophets of the Lord, in language too sublimely impressive, too strikingly forcible, and too clear and explicit to be either disregarded or misunderstood, excepting by the inattentive or the willfully blind and deaf. This subject has been treated at considerable length in a late publication entitled Parallel Miracles, endeavoring to prove that according to prophecies, the Gypsies are the descendants of the ancient Egyptians, and that they are hereafter to be reassembled in their own country and to be brought under a Savior and a great one to know the Lord. End of chapter. Appendix: A Gypsy Family. Since this work went to press, I was informed that there was a public house in the town kept by Gypsies. As this was an uncommon circumstance, and as I wished to obtain more information respecting that people, I lost no time in calling at the house and inquiring for the landlord. I was shown into a little parlor, and after a while he came to me. His appearance was not prepossessing. He seemed suspicious and embarrassed. He left the door open and sat down by the side of it. After informing him who I was, I told him that I had taken the liberty of calling, really wishing to serve him, to ask him a few questions, which I nevertheless did not wish him to answer if not quite agreeable. I said that during some years I had been much interested respecting the Gypsies. Without speaking a word, he here arose and abruptly left the room. Not knowing the reason, and supposing that he might be gone for something or for someone, I sat a considerable time waiting. At length I rang the bell. When the wife came in, I told her that I had called to have some conversation, which I thought might be of service, with her husband, but that he had left me, and I did not know whether he was returning or not. She said that she believed that he was gone out, but asked if she could not give me the information that I wanted. She was a quick, lively, rather good-looking little woman, evidently only half-caste, but with bright, dark, gypsy eyes. She sat down, and I told her that I had some years ago written a book about the Gypsies, and that I was then going to print another. Her attention was now roused, and she seemed pleased. I had been told that they had a daughter about 14, and that the father had asserted that if she married to please him, she should have half a peck of sovereigns. This young lady now came in. If I had seen her anywhere accidentally, I should have conceived that she was a young Jewess. It has long struck me that in the countenances of those who are young and handsome among that people, whether male or female, there is a look of somewhat rather approaching to superhuman. A little of this I thought perceptible in this young half-gypsy. She remained listening and greatly interested in the conversation. I told him about Clara's coming to live with us and the way in which she had behaved herself. I asked the mother if she knew anything about the urns. Her eyes sparkled, while with her characteristic quickness she exclaimed, "Oh, yes, the urns rank the first among the Gypsies. It is well known that they are directly descended from King Pharaoh." I, however, found that she conceived that Pharaoh was a king of England, for on asking her if the Gypsies were not originally from Egypt, she said no such thing. She assured me that the Gypsies were the original inhabitants of England, there having been none in it before them. She said that she had not seen any of the urns for a long time. I then took out of my pocket the proof sheet containing the list of words in the Gypsy language as repeated by Clara, and told her what were the contents. "What?" she cried. "Is there a book printed with our gibberish in it?" I told her yes. I read some of the words, to which, with a smile and great quickness, she gave the English. I then asked what were the gypsy names to many of the English words, which she generally gave the same as Clara had given. In some instances, she gave a different one, but on my saying what Clara had given, she said yes, that is it too. There are 2 names. Some few she did not know. As there were people drinking in the house, and she wanted to wait on them, I did not stop any longer, but left a part of the book, as she said, that her husband could read. There was an appearance of great discomfort throughout. There were 4 children, seemed like beings out of their natural element. I was, however, glad to have the accuracy of Clara's information confirmed. While the behavior of the man strongly evinced that jealous suspicion of all inquiries into their peculiar circumstances, which is very general among them, strongly indicating their designation to remain a distinct people. I must request my readers now, at the conclusion, to recollect the observations made in the commencement of this work, viz., that the great object of it was to enforce what I conceived to be a most important truth, i.e., that the Gypsies are the descendants of the ancient Egyptians, dispersed among all the nations for their sins during many ages, and finally to be restored to the land of their forefathers, as foretold by the 3 great prophets of Israel, that all circumstances relating to their conduct during the time of their dispersion are of very minor importance, in no way affecting the great truth in question, though, abstractedly considered, they are of themselves most intensely interesting. Different writers on the subject have, from various causes, been induced to represent them differently. This must inevitably be the case as relates to the moral conduct of such a people, but whatever that may have been, it in no degree affects the truth that has been attempted to be established. A truth, the importance of which no one that I am acquainted with brought before the public during the last 1800 years by any means equals. This assertion, taking the subject in all its bearings, will, I conceive, scarcely be denied. Are you then prepared, it may be asked, to state when these predicted occurrences may be expected to take place? Certainly not. Times and reasons are known to God alone. He is not slack concerning his promises, but it must be remembered that with him 1,000 years are but as one day. There are, however, at this time strong intimations that the end of all predicted things is drawing nigh, a circumstance which must be preceded by the coming in of the Gentile world. More progress has been made towards the promotion of that object during the last half-century than probably during the preceding 1,000 years. This has not been solely the effect of exertions of the Christian world, but the way, as it seems to me, had been gradually prepared for them by the hand of almighty power, in the extension of decrepitude and enfeebled dotage over all the old idolatrous superstitions of the world. Perhaps I cannot enforce this surmise better than by the following short and impressive extract from Saturday Evening, a publication replete with the strongly expressed sentiments of a deeply reflecting mind by the author of The Natural History of Enthusiasm. Quote, "Nothing more remarkably distinguishes the religious state of mankind in our own times as compared with any other eras, concerning which history enables us at all to form an opinion, than the air of dotage which belongs without exception to every one of the leading superstitions of the nations. There have been times when, if some were on their wane, others were in full vigor, or just starting forth from their cradle with a giant strength. If we track the course of time during the lapse of 24 centuries, we shall find this to have been the case in each period. In each there was, in some quarter within the circle of historic light, or its penumbra, one or more forms of religious error, which very firmly grasped the minds of the nations that were its victims. But it seems now as if there were neither courage nor concert in the halls of aerial government. Not only is every extant form of error ancient, most of them immemorially so, but every form is imbecile as well as old. Or if we would seek a phrase that should at once describe the present condition of false religion universally, we find it in the expression already quoted. The errors of mankind are now antiquated and in their dotage. Dare we so far penetrate futurity as to add, they are ready to vanish away? The heroic savage who stalks through the wilderness of America, and the pallid Mongol, and the feverish Tartar of Central Asia, and the luxurious islander of the Southern and Pacific Ocean, are men upon whose visage, in whose customs, and in whose belief, we read the characters of a distant age. They all may boast an ancestry, and they possess a memorial. They are not the mere progeny of the desert, born of oblivion and destined to oblivion, but the descendants of men, and the races they belong to are the wrecks of primitive empires. A personage of princely birth and education has wandered far from his patrimony, has fallen from his rank, has endured many degradations, has forgotten his rights. Nevertheless, there is an inalienable greatness about him, and even the trumpery of the ornaments he wears contains proof of his noble lineage. Like everything else that distinguishes these fallen and impoverished families, their religion is a relic. And it is a relic faded in colors and decayed. If the history of the subjugation of the empires of Mexico and Peru, and if that of the Tartar conquest of the Middle Ages, and if the imperfect notices of the ancient Scythian nations preserved by the Greek writers, may be taken as affording the means of a comparison between the present and the past religious condition of those classes of the human family of which we are speaking, it is quite manifest that the dimness and the incertitude and the terrors of extreme age have come upon all their superstitions. The force of the fanaticism they once engendered is spent. The demon is less the object of terror, is less often and less largely propitiated with blood. The priest is less a prince than he was, and more a mercenary. Yes, and symptoms have appeared, even in this class of incredulity and reason. No phrase better describes these now fading errors than that already quoted. They are all superannuated and decayed with age. The Mohammedan empire is decrepit. Mohammedan faith is decrepit, and both are so by confession of the parties. In matters both civil and religious, those days are come upon these superstition in which the sun and the moon and the stars are darkened, nor do the clouds of refreshment return after the rain. And the keepers of the house tremble, the strong bow themselves, and the grinders, the powers of mechanic art and trade, cease because they are few. And they that look out at the windows, the learned class, are darkened, and the doors are shut in the streets by jealousy and depopulation, and the wakefulness of conscience danger is upon it, and the daughters of music, revelry, are brought low, and fears are in the way, and desire faileth. Is it indeed a gratuitous assumption, advanced only to give completeness to an argument, when we say that the religion of the prophet is now in its stage of extreme decrepitude? Least of all, then, should any calling themselves Christians now feel and speak and act as if they abhorred advancement, or as if decay and slumber were far less dreaded by them than change, even of the happiest sort. Let the fond admirer of his own church, whatever may be its pretensions, assure himself that the conversion of Asia and Africa and Europe and America will raise the temperature, spiritual and moral, of the world's atmosphere, as must dissolve to its very elements every community now calling itself a church. All principles shall then invest themselves in new power. All notions of good and evil be recast. All forms and constitutions be new modeled. We shall indeed believe the same things as now, but in another manner. We shall practice the same virtues, but at a different rate, with firmer motives and under the guidance of an extended exposition of every precept. Instead, therefore, of cherishing a blind attachment to phrases, modes, usages, opinions which are separable from the substance of religion, wise and docile spirits, though they may not hope fully to anticipate in imagination changes that are to be effected, will at least preserve with care a state of feeling, such as shall prove the best preparative for joining in with whatever may attend the expected times of refreshment. Perhaps no people, not really Christians, are better prepared to chime in with such a general amalgamation of the human race than the Gypsies are. They, of all others, will have the least of error to unlearn, and after all, that is generally the most difficult, as well as the first step towards acquiring a knowledge of the truth. By having been kept, as predicted to themselves, despised in the open fields, without idols, God seems to have retained them constantly ready to obey that call to a knowledge of the truth as it is in Christ Jesus, which I can have little or no doubt is finally to be extended to them in the land of their forefathers. They, with the Jews, both predicted, are the only instances in the history of the world of any people thrown at once into a state in which they were to remain for long periods unaltered, and in which they, as I conceive, have remained so unaltered during almost 2,000 years. All others have had their feeble infancy, vigorous youth, powerful manhood, and decrepit old age. And this not only as relates to their political existence, but also as respects their various systems of religion. Christianity alone has stopped short of the last state, but even with her, change and apparent incertitude has been perpetual. We have indeed scriptural authority, as well as that of experience, for asserting that all things in this world are constantly changing. The Jews and the Gypsies appear, however, to have been, during nearly 2,000 years, extraordinary exceptions to this general rule. Yet were they both, before their absent states were decreed, as much subjected to change as any other people. It is highly remarkable, too, that the respective states into which the two people before mentioned were decreed by the divine fiat, and in which they still remain, were as different as could well be conceived from those which they had formerly occupied. God, however, by his prophets, as moved by the Holy Ghost, decreed them their respective extraordinary conditions, in which to remain unaltered till it should please him to recall them to their forfeited patrimony. They are both of them now awaiting that call, unable, and indeed indisposed, to extricate themselves from their decreed long thraldom. During nearly 2,000 years have they each respectively thus remained unchanged. That state has known no infancy, no youth, no manhood, no old age. There has been no growing in strength, nor has there been any decay. The decreed blindness rests upon them both, and will so rest till God, in his own good and predicted time, shall withdraw the bandage from their eyes. All this must have declared a miraculous interference, had nothing still more astonishing accompanied it. But these two people, thus never changing, have not been, are not, compacted together in their respective countries, but are each of them scattered, almost singly, among nearly all people, nations, and languages in the civilized world. The one people, as before stated, in the cities and populous towns, and the other in the wilderness and open fields. Neither people either have had, nor can have any system of government, yet they do both act, throughout the whole of each dispersed race, with more of a unanimous accordance than any other people, equally numerous on the face of the earth. Since their dispersion, there has been no change, neither shadow of turning. As God sent them forth, attesters of his power in the cities and fields of all the earth, so do they remain, and so will they be found when the awful summons for their return to their respective fathers' lands shall reach their ears. The end.
Shalom, shalom.
And this concludes the reading of the Gypsies, their origin, continuance, and destination. Please do hit the like button, leave me a comment, subscribe to the channel, and until we meet each other again at the next video, be blessed.